Alright, and welcome back to our next installment in our study of Islam. This week we're going to be continuing our study from last time, which is a study of pre-Islamic Arabia, or the pre-Islamic history of the Arabian Peninsula. Just for a little bit of a refresher, last week we had talked about one of the difficulties in trying to understand the historical perspective of the Arabian Peninsula is the fact that in the Southern Peninsula there was no overarching culture. There was not, for the most part, a centralized culture where that you would have a centralized government, military, religion, a form of writing. So these things were missing for the vast majority of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, probably in the next session, we're going to start looking rather briefly at some of the kingdoms that the archaeologists have been able to find where that there was somewhat of a culture. But again, part of the problem has been is that the historical record is very blank in looking at a lot of the development of these kingdoms. Again, when we start looking at these in the next week or so, we're going to be looking basically at the southwestern portion of the peninsula, particularly around the modern-day country of Yemen. So anyway, bringing what we talked about last time a little bit forward, we're going to continue to look at the development of the culture such as it is, or such as it was in the peninsula. When we discussed this before, I'm going to use the example that we did the last time, and this is this gentleman here, Yarub bin Yashub bin Qatan. And basically what this means is Yarub, the son of Yashub, the son of Qatan. This Qatan is the person who was the progenitor, the originator of the Qatani tribe. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this again, especially as we transition in today's presentation, is the emphasis on the family. Particularly in these nomadic Bedouin tribes, the whole composition of the tribe is based around family units. So when we look at this, the tribe itself was called the Kabila. This is a general term for the tribe itself, and when you look at it, it was the Kabila was based upon or dependent upon the interdependence of the separate clans within the tribes. The basic unit of the Kabila was the tent, which was called the Kema. So when you looked at if you're at an oasis or a wadi and you saw the tribe spread out in front of you, basically what you'd have is the tribe itself, what you're actually seeing, unless it just happened to have several tribes that have come together at a watering hole. But if you're looking at one tribe, the Kabila, that's the tribe, is based on the tent or the Kema. And the Kema is the individual families resided within that tent. So you start off with the Kema, then the units that travel together are called a hay. Okay, so you have a tribe that may be operating within a particular area. You've got the Kema, which is the individual tents. These together create what's called the hay. The same family group is called a comm. Okay, and these comms, when they're interrelated together, form the tribe. So if you look at it this way, you have the kema or the tent, you have the traveling unit. These units together form a comm. The comm is the Kabbalah. Okay, when you look at the tribe, whether you're talking about a comm or the actual Kabbalah, they would elect a term that most of us are familiar with, which is a sheikh. And when you look at the sheikh, it could refer to like a ruler, not necessarily so much a king, but it could be the person who might be over the entire Kabbalah, or the sheikh could be someone who might be in charge of the traveling group, or might even be a sheikh within the tent. All sheikh is an honorific. Just basically says that this is a person who has attained a certain amount of wisdom. This is a person that we value his judgment, and this is a person that if we're going to have maybe a squabble or some type of an argument, the sheikh is someone that perhaps we're going to take our argument to, and we're going to take advantage of his wisdom and his understanding, and hopefully we'll be able to answer or settle our arguments or our disagreements. Another way of looking at sheikh or sheikh, one of the definitions of this is one among equals. So what you're looking at is, this is not, I think whenever you read some books or you watch some of the Hollywood movies and stuff, you look at a sheikh and you see this person who's like a potentate, a person who's like a king. That really was not, particularly at the tribal level, the sheikh, that's not really what he did. He was not there to be a king. He was just basically one among equals. But as I said before, because of his knowledge, because of his wisdom, the people would choose to elect this person to have some type of value as far as his judgment. When you look at the actual tribe's name, it was preceded by the term Banu. Okay, so Banu indicates a tribe or the children of. So if we go back to this gentleman here, Yarub bin Yasjud bin Qatan, if you wanted to actually talk about the tribe itself, the tribe would be Banu Qatan, or the tribe of Qatan. Again, understanding that when we're talking about this, we're talking about the descendants of this gentleman Qatan. Okay, so this is really, really important whenever you're starting to look at the history of the pre-Islamic Arabia, the peninsula itself, because the history is very, very much about families. It is very, very much about the basic family unit and how that unit is expanded into the unit being inside the tent inside this traveling unit that might be inside of that spreads out to a bit larger division, and then to the overall tribe itself of Kabbalah. Okay, and again, the name of the tribe would be Banu Qatan, or the children of Qatan. So that's what we're going to look at. When you look at a traveling Bedouin tribe, what is also interesting is that the land that was actually used for tillage, for gardens, the water itself, was all considered to be a common property. The idea of, again, because you're talking about a nomadic existence moving from one place to another, it would be very, very difficult for an individual or for a tribe itself to own and maintain ownership of a particular piece of ground. And again, we talked before last week when we talked about the battles that were fought even amongst the Arabs themselves, the Jews that were living on the Jewish tribes, and there were Jewish tribes as well as Christian tribes that were living on the peninsula prior to Muhammad. But when you look at what they fought over, the majority of the things that they fought about were the pasturage, this land that might be available for their livestock. We also talked about how they fought about water, because again, with livestock, what they eat and what they drink is very, very important to them. So when you look at what's considered to be property of the tribe, this land, this pasturage, this water was all considered to be common property. And it would be underneath the direct control of the tribe rather than particular individuals. What's also interesting about this is that when you go to and you look at how the social structure, particularly in Saudi Arabia, is designed now, there are still a lot of lands that are considered to be owned by the government, not by individuals, even though there are individual properties. But a lot of these natural resources, particularly in this case oil, in addition to water and these other things, these are considered to be common properties, which the royal family to a certain extent holds governance over, supposedly not for their own benefit, but for the entire benefit of all the residents of Saudi Arabia. So the only things that were considered to be personal property or that could be owned by an individual or even the family itself were the things that were inside the tent itself, which we talked about before was the kema. That was the only thing that was considered to be personal property. So if you have people who are living in a tent, that might be my bed, that might be my pillow, that might be my clothing, that might be my shoes, that might be my wife, and my wife might have these particular items, maybe a hairbrush or whatever, but those items inside the tent were considered to be family property, were considered to be individual property. The tent itself was a family property, and as the family grew larger and was no longer able to reside together underneath one roof, so to speak, when you have the tent with the kema, what would happen at that point is that they would start a new kema, a new tent, where they would eventually move out when, like say, a son had married enough daughters, had enough children to be able to support the moving of the tent, and then his family would move into this new kema, and they would, in a sense, start over again. So, what does this have to do with Islam? What was very interesting, when you go back to this idea of family, particularly the family as we've been describing here with the Bedouins, Muhammad borrowed this concept whenever he started to talk about the family of Islam. And actually he uses a term, ummah. And you'll sometimes see that word ummah with an H behind it. But basically what he's talking about here with the nation, this concept of ummah or the nation, this is the Islamic nation. And that's when he talks about, whenever he starts in the hadiths, when you start talking about some of the things that come out within the Quran itself, the Sunnah, when he's talking about the ummah, he's talking about the Islamic nation, which is going back to this concept of the Bedouin tribal family. So that's very, very evident. It's very, very pervasive whenever you start looking at how Islam itself is actually structured. And to a certain extent, to understand Islam, I think you need to understand that the importance of these individual family units, and as those individual units get a little bit bigger, you go into a hay, a qawm, and then eventually into the Kabila. When he started to structure a nation, and in a sense what he was trying to do with the Ummah was to take and move beyond, even though he was using the family structure, the tribal structure as the basic unit, by coining this phrase or using this phrase Ummah, he's trying to take it beyond the concept while adhering to the roots of the tribe, adhering to the roots of the family. He's now trying to move it beyond the basic tribal unit, and now he's starting to look at the concept of a nation. Now, remember what we talked about last time and also at the beginning of this session is we were talking about how that was one of the problems with pre-Islamic Arabia, and that there was no overarching civilization. There wasn't a centralized government. There wasn't a centralized army. You didn't have a written poetry. You didn't have written epic stories. You know, all these, you didn't have a law that pervaded the entire the culture. So when Muhammad begins this process of establishing the Islamic Ummah, now he's got to take the next step, where that now all these things that you associate with a nation, the centralized government, the religion, so forth and so on, he's now taking that step to be able to move Islam from the family, from the tribal concept, and now starts moving it toward a national concept. All right, for those of you who are following me on YouTube, we're going to stop at this point. If you're interested in looking at the rest of the videotape, I encourage you to go to the website, Halcyone Publishing, where that you can be able to see the rest of today's session as well as the outline. The concepts that we're talking about, these definitions, you're going to see in the book that I've written, Islam, the Way of Submission, which is available on Kindle as well as on the website, Halcyone Publishing. So there is additional information that's in this book that is not in the presentation for today. So if you're interested in these things, please go to Kindle and you can get the book there, or you can be able to purchase the book online at Halcyone Publishing. So for those watching on YouTube, we'll say goodbye for now, and we'll wait for everyone else in just